Hello everyone and welcome back to EddieStyle channel. In this episode, I had the absolute honor to sit with one of the most productive, renowned, and inspiring astrophysicists in the world, Dr. Avi Loeb. I had the pleasure of discussing with him one of the most fascinating topics in the world, UFOs and aliens. Dr. Loeb is a real prodigy, earning his PhD in plasma physics at the age of only 24. He went on to become the chair of the Harvard Astronomy Department, and he led it for a record of 9 years. He's one of the very few top scientists who doesn't afraid to take the UFO and alien topic seriously, and he pushes for a rigorous scientific inquiry. He wrote a few best-selling books about the phenomena, including Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. In this conversation, I asked Dr. Loeb, why is it that top scientists are terrified of touching the UFO phenomena despite the fact that they are tasked with pushing the boundaries of scientific discovery, and despite mounting evidence such as photos, testimonies, videos, and of course, congressional hearings under oath of top military officials. I also asked him about the extraordinary claims that the astrophysicist Eric Davis made in Congress, that allegedly there have been at least 4 species of aliens that have been interacting with Earth: the Greys, the Nordics, the Mantis, and the Reptilians. I also pushed him and asked him, what if the military were to approach you and offer you a position to work on alien crafts and alien bodies, but swear you to secrecy? Will you ever break your oath? His answers truly surprised me. Here's my conversation with Dr. Avi Loeb. Thank you for inviting me to your home.
Oh, thanks for coming. As you can tell, I enjoy very much being embedded in nature because I grew up on a farm, and I still think of myself as a farm boy. I also think of myself as any other person who stays curious about where we live. So I don't see anything special. What is surprising for me about my life is that things that appear to be common sense to me are not in academia. And that's what sets me apart. It's just the fact that others do not think the same way.
Why can't they see what you see?
Well, because in academia, there is a culture of mainstream scientists who are resting their prestige on past knowledge. And that means that they would like to keep the herd of younger people aligned with their accomplishments, because any dissent or deviating views threaten their ego or their status. And as a result of that, there is this tendency that is similar to statistics when you deal with the central limit theorem of regression to the mean. When you deal with a large community, the deviations from the main view appear to be diminished. And nowadays, the scientific community is much larger than it used to be. So this societal pressure, especially in the age of social media, is very strong. And, young scientists are asking, should I risk my career and try to argue something different? And they behave just like legacy media reporters who are trying to please their audience. They basically are trying to demonstrate that they deserve a position, funding, and so forth by reporting news that are consistent with past thinking. And I see that as a problem because, science, or in particular physics, is supposed to be guided by evidence. But if you have a prejudice, if you think you know everything, you would never seek something new. You would never explore the unknown because you might imagine that you know the answer to it. And there is no bigger question than the question, are we alone?
Correct.
Which I find to be the most romantic question in science.
Yes.
And almost all of my colleagues are attempting to find whether there are microbes. These are primitive life forms elsewhere. And they argue that microbes emerged on Earth very early, as soon as the Earth cooled. the last universal common ancestor that is called Luca was dated by its DNA to have emerged on Earth 4.2 billion years ago, only a few hundred million years after the Earth formed. So very early you had microbes. Therefore, microbes might be very abundant. Wherever you have warm liquid water and the nutrients, you will get primitive forms of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so the assumption is it's easier to find microbes than intelligent beings like ourselves that appeared only at the end of the history of Earth, only over the past few million years, which is a tiny fraction, just one part in 1,000 of the history of Earth. And so they seek evidence for microbes and are willing to invest more than $10 billion in the Habitable World Observatory that will be constructed, let's say, within 20 years, to look at 25 exoplanets and search in the atmosphere of those exoplanets whether there might be the molecular or chemical fingerprints of microbes. And I say, well, first of all, microbes are quite boring. We exist here on Earth. We know of billions of Earth-Sun analogs that may be out there. And we should hedge our bets because even though microbes might be much more abundant, it may be easier to detect technological signatures. If I find a gadget from another civilization, a technological gadget that is not human-made, near Earth, that would be very easy to interpret in terms of not only life, but intelligent life being out there. And moreover, we can learn from them. They may have had more time than we did for developing science and technology. So we might learn about technologies of our future. We might get a sense of modesty, which we very much need, since Friedrich Nietzsche argued God is dead, and we felt that we are at the top of the food chain for more than 1 century by developing science and technology. It's about time for us to recognize that there might be a smarter kid on our block.
But my question is, we are here on Earth. We're looking around ourselves, and we can see birds and ants, but we don't see any other creature out of billions and billions that can actually build a home like this or build a rocket. And maybe the common sense thing to do is to say, okay, we are unique on this Earth. Perhaps we are unique anywhere. And perhaps on other planets, if there is life, it must be microbial because there's just more chance of it being microbial and primitive as opposed to intelligent. But you argue that it's easier, could be easier to find extraterrestrial gadgets, not only elsewhere, but here around the Earth. How do we do that?
Well, because we produce space trash. Just in January 2025, there was an object that came near Earth. It was cataloged as being an asteroid, but soon afterwards, the astronomers realized that one is actually moving just like the Tesla Roadster car that SpaceX launched in 2018 as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy. So we realized this is actually a technological object. And all I'm saying is that Elon Musk was not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. And we should be open-minded. Without seeking the evidence, obviously we will not find anything. And only over the past decade, we discovered the first objects from outside the solar system near Earth, serendipitously. So it's about time for us to invest funds in the search for objects. And maybe most of them would be rocks, objects that came from outside the solar system. But among the rocks, we might find some technological space trash. And, the thinking that we are unique and privileged reminds me of my daughters when they were very young and stayed at home. Their training data set, just like with AI systems, was limited to our home. They saw from the windows of our home, they saw other houses, but they did not imagine that there are kids just like them, worthy of attention. They thought that they're at the center of the universe. Nobody is as privileged as they are. But that was just a limited training data set. As soon as they went to the kindergarten on the first day, they had a psychological shock because they realized there are so many other kids and some of them are smarter than they are. And we are not yet mature. We haven't realized that we are not the smarter kid on this block, that there might be things like us elsewhere, which is a very natural thing to imagine, and they might have existed for billions of years before us. Most of them are dead by now, but we could still do space archaeology to find the relics that they left behind.
If you want to win a Nobel Prize, if you want to be remembered, you must go and push the frontier. So when they see an opportunity, when they see a person like you, the longest serving head of the Astronomy Department for 9 years, why is their first instinct is to resist? Is the fear of ridicule stronger than the will to be great, in your opinion?
Well, one aspect of it is that the public cares a lot about this subject. To me, it sounds like a big plus because science is funded by taxpayers, and it would be appropriate for academia to reflect the interests of the public. However, many of my colleagues have a different opinion. They are worried about people making nonsensical statements about aliens, the science fiction ideas that are not substantiated by any evidence. There are all kinds of crazies making statements that they have this and that kind of experience that is not, again, substantiated by data. So they argue we don't want to sleep in the same bed as those people. But what they're missing is 1,000 years ago, there were claims that the human body has a soul and therefore it should not be dissected. And imagine if scientists were to say, we don't want to conduct operations on the human body because there are these crazy notions that it might have a soul and it will be affected by an operation. Where would modern medicine be? My point is, what matters is the question and the intellectual significance of exploring it, rather than the fact that there are some people making wrong statements or unsubstantiated statements about it. If you go to the courtroom and you listen to people under oath making nonsensical statements, okay, but then you end up with DNA evidence that demonstrates what really happened there. Obviously, you pay attention to the DNA evidence and you don't care about the fact that people made some statements beforehand. And that's why many people on death row were exonerated eventually. So my point is science operates the same way. We want to find the evidence that will guide us towards the truth. But if you already resist collecting the evidence, you can always argue, I don't have extraordinary evidence, therefore this extraordinary claim should not be funded, should not be explored. That's the wrong approach because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Without seeking the evidence, you will never find it.
Right.
And, that's the approach that the Vatican took when Galileo said, look through my telescope and you will see the moons of Jupiter moving around it and not around the Earth. And they said, we don't want to look through a telescope. It will change the view that we advocated. But in 1992, 350 years after Galileo died, the Vatican released a statement saying Galileo was right. That was 2 decades after humans landed on the moon. Yeah. It was a bit late, but they felt that it's foolish to resist the notion that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, and so they agreed to it. So my point is, if I get to follow the evidence, if I get sufficient funds from private donors to find evidence that will be beyond any reasonable doubt, it would appear foolish for the critics, for the skeptics to ignore it. And that's the point I want to get to. I want to be flooded with data, flooded with evidence so that nobody would be able to deny it.
So 2 questions. First, how did all this mainstream influence pass you by? Is it related to you growing up on a farm? And the second thing, you mentioned Galileo, and you opened the Galileo Project. Could you tell us about that and what its mission, and why did you call it the Galileo Project?
Well, it all starts, I guess, with my marriage, because my wife asked me not to be on social media for her own reasons. And I agree to that. And as a result, I don't care how many likes I get. And I don't define myself by popular view. I don't care what other people are saying. I try to pursue what common sense indicates. And to me, that's common sense. Even if common sense is not common in academia, I will follow it. It's irrelevant what my colleagues are saying because this sounds to me like the right thing to do.
Yes.
And the reason I can do it is because I don't depend on them. I have tenure. The whole purpose of tenure is to allow freedom, not to worry about job security. And moreover, I seek a higher intelligence in interstellar space because I don't find it very often here on Earth. So it's a way for me to escape from whatever, condition we are born into. It's just like Oscar Wilde said, we are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I'm one of these that are willing to find the answer by looking at the stars rather than by looking at my colleagues and trying to please them.
And what about the Galileo Project?
I became interested in this possibility that perhaps there are technological artifacts near Earth from the discovery of the first interstellar objects. The first one was reported in 2017 by a telescope in Hawaii called Oumuamua. The first object to have been reported by astronomers that came from outside the solar system looked really weird.
Professor Avi Loeb joins us tonight. Professor, thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind summing up what you believe we saw in 2017.
Oumuamua, is that what I said?
That's the right thing.
Oumuamua, which is an object that we detected in space that you believe could possibly have been extraterrestrial.
This object behaved in an anomalous way. It was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force. It had most likely a flat shape, at least 10 times longer than it is thick. And then, in addition to that, the object was that came from a very special frame of reference. It was at rest relative to the frame of the Milky Way galaxy, the local frame. It's called the local standard of rest. And the solar system just bumped into it. And the question is, why was it in that special frame? Because, only a small fraction, less than a few percent of all stars are so much at rest in the frame of the Milky Way galaxy. Many of them are moving around at speeds that exceed that of Oumuamua by at least a factor of 10. So that's another interesting anomaly about Oumuamua. And after that, I asked my student to check a catalog that NASA compiled of meteors. These are objects colliding with Earth. And we discovered one that definitely came from outside the solar system, was moving extremely fast, not bound by gravity to the sun, and also had a very strong material strength because it disintegrated only in the lower atmosphere. So I led an expedition to the Pacific Ocean to search for the materials of that. But around the same time, there was also a report from the Director of National Intelligence to the US Congress about unidentified objects in the sky that the intelligence and the military are finding, and they cannot explain them. And as a result, they established a new organization in the Pentagon called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And as soon as the first report came, I decided to establish the Galileo Project. And we now are 4 years later. We built an operating observatory at Harvard University where we tested all the instruments, and we're using machine learning software to analyze the data that we obtain in the infrared, visible light, radio, and audio. And we are searching for any outliers, objects that behave differently than familiar objects like birds, drones, balloons, airplanes, satellites. And so far, we looked at 1 million objects, and we can say that less than a few % of them are unidentified. But right now, we're trying to do triangulation, meaning observing an object from different directions so that we can figure out the distance of the object. Just like we use 2 eyes to figure out the distance of a predator. It was very useful for survival. So with that, we should be able to identify much better outliers. We have a second observatory that we just assembled in Pennsylvania, and a third one that we're assembling during the summer 2025 in Nevada. And altogether, we'll have 3 operating observatories by the end of the summer, which is amazing because it will give us data on a few million objects every year that we can monitor. And even if 1 in a million happens to be from another civilization, that will be the biggest discovery in science ever.
Yes.
But if we end up realizing that all the objects are human-made, I would still feel good about it because the AI software that we develop and the sensors that we develop could be helpful for the Department of Defense. So it will be good for national security, identifying all the objects in the sky, not missing on the Chinese spy balloon, for example, as they did. And so in difference from other academic studies, this one, I think, is contributing also for a practical purpose, which is national security. So that's why in Congress, I argued that this subject deserves $1 billion.
Yes. And I completely agree with you, by the way. I know you're also working with satellites, right?
Well, we did collect some satellite data. It's not as good as the government has. So the government has much more data that is of much higher quality. And it's an interesting question whether the government has either information or materials from, let's say, crash sites that indicate superhuman technologies. And I don't know because I've never seen that, but if the government has anything, I would love to help them figure it out because it would save me time.
Okay, so here's a question. You were on Capitol Hill a few weeks ago. You spoke with Congress people. You're well known. And you just said that you would help them. Let's say somebody would approach you, some high-ranking member, put you in a skiff, in a room, and says, Dr. Loeb, I've been following your work. I love your work. I would like you to come. We have in our possession alien technology and even alien bodies. The only condition is that you can never, ever talk about it. What do you do?
I will go and help them because, frankly, what drives me is curiosity. So I would like to know the answer. Now, for an outside observer, the way you will realize that something changed is because I will stop doing what I'm doing because I will know the answer, but I will not tell you what the answer is. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm just like a kid. I'm driven by curiosity. And for me, knowing the answer is the only thing that matters. I had an interview just a week ago where I was asked, well, if you are probably doing what you're doing just to get the Nobel Prize. And I said, no, that's completely untrue. And I made a promise that if I discover alien intelligence, I will decline the invitation from the Nobel Committee to visit Stockholm because who cares about a prize that is given by humans to humans for many years if there is a chance to learn from a superhuman intelligence out there? All of these awards, honors, they pale in significance relative to partnering with something bigger than us. It's a substitute for the notion of religion. Religion talks about God.
Yeah.
And I say, well, maybe there is something far more advanced than we are out there. Moses in the Old Testament, in the Bible, became a believer of God after witnessing the burning bush that was never consumed.
Yes.
And if we were to present Moses with a cell phone from today, he would have been even more impressed than a bush that is burning. This cell phone would be amazing to Moses. And that would convince Moses that there is some superhuman intelligence that produced this cell phone. But in fact, it was not it was not a superhuman. It's just humans that develop technologies that Moses is not familiar with.
Yes.
And so, in fact, if he would get this cell phone and it has a GPS system that would save him 40 years of walking in the desert, he could have gotten to the promised land within a few weeks just by using the GPS. So it has also practical benefits. And the same for us. I think once we encounter more advanced technologies, it would leave us with some sense of religious awe and recognition that, there might be higher level levels of intelligence out there, that we are not at the top of the food chain, cosmologically speaking.
Yes.
And that we can learn from them, and rather than being engaged in all these conflicts here on Earth,
Correct.
and looking down on other people, fighting for territories, all of these will go away because there is much more real estate in interstellar space than here on Earth.
Yeah, right. You mentioned eyewitness testimony, and I'm in law school. We take it very seriously, but in science, you treat it pretty skeptically.
Right.
But
I don't care about people.
at all.
No, I care about instruments because, that's the notion also of FIFA, the Soccer World Organization, when right now, when they need to make a very difficult decision, they rely on cameras looking at the soccer field. They don't go around and ask for testimonies from the players or the audience, because we all know that people should not be trusted. And when there is a car accident, people have very different reports about what really happened.
Yes.
Of course, in the legal system, sometimes you have no other choice but to rely on what people tell you, and you are trying to assess who is telling the truth. But my point is, what we regard as truth based on people might not be the truth, okay? And people can testify under oath and be 100% convinced that they are telling the truth, but it may not be the truth. And by the way, this is also significant for AI systems that we develop, because you may say, oh, maybe AI will get to the truth. No, it really depends on the information that is used to train the AI, because if AI doesn't have access to the actual evidence, it will still be hallucinating, imagining things, and having wishful thinking the way people do.
Yes.
It's really all about evidence collected by instruments that have no personality, they have no agenda. You just need to calibrate the instruments, understand what they're measuring, and apply them. And only then you get a sense of the physical reality. I'm not talking about the psychological reality of people, the way people respond to the physical reality. Of course, that depends. So if a person feels something, that obviously depends on what the person tells you, and that's the work of psychologists. But I'm referring to the physical reality that we all share, that is objective, supposed to be measured by instruments. That's what physics is all about. And it's amazing because the laws of physics cannot be broken. There are so many electrons in the universe, 10 to the power, 90 or whatever. And we haven't found an electron that breaks the laws of physics. If someone would find such an electron, it would be a major discovery. Whereas, there are maybe 8 billion people on Earth right now, and every day there are many of them that break the law, okay?
Right.
So there is something different about the physical reality. Once you identify a law, it's obeyed by all constituents everywhere, not just here on Earth, but at the edge of the universe, billions of years ago. That's amazing, and I think that's much more impressive than the laws that we constructed to manage society.
Yes, but do you feel like we can add something to the pile of evidence by taking eyewitness testimony seriously and maybe doing something interdisciplinary where we combine physics with maybe sociology and psychology? Because why would so many people around the world that don't know each other throughout so many years say the same things?
Because they heard about each other. I don't see that as evidence. I think it's intriguing, and that's why I'm doing the Galileo Project. I want to find out the hard evidence from instruments. Only that would convince me. There are so many stories along human history. People love stories. They believe in stories. Just look at politics. It's enough to tell a good story to get a huge crowd supporting you in politics. But science doesn't operate this way. In science, you're not supposed to be popular. You're not supposed to attract a lot of people to believe in something. What you are supposed to do is find the physical reality, irrespective of how many people believe that it's this way. So if I go to some laboratory that is classified and I find the truth, I know that there are aliens, I don't need to tell anyone. I don't need to be popular. I don't need to impress anyone. I just want to know that, because if they exist, they exist.
Right.
The physical reality doesn't care about us.
Yeah.
If we have neighbors, they're out there, unrelated to what we think, just like the Earth moves around the sun, irrespective of what the Vatican said.
Yeah. You sat next to Eric Davis in Washington, where he said famously that there are at least 4 civilizations that we know of that visited Earth: the Nordics, the Greys, the Lizard people, and the Mantis people, I think. If you could meet
The reptilian.
the Reptilians.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, reptilian, not lizard people. Sorry.
Typically, the most species people really like the Greys, the Nordics. People were talking about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian insectoids, it's that they resemble to the precision of reptile or an insect type humanoid, because they have this head and 4 limbs and torso.
If you could meet some of them, you could ask only one question. What would you ask?
What happened before the Big Bang?
Really?
Because that's the story of our roots, where we came from. It also will allow us to figure out how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, which is the biggest challenge of modern physics. We haven't resolved that. So we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. There is a singularity in Einstein's theory at that point in time, but with quantum mechanics, we should be able to figure out what really happened before that.
The question is there something in possession of government that the scientists should look into? And, I would love to help government figure it out, because it may guide us about a theory of quantum reality.
And then we don't know what happens at the centers of black holes. I often recommend to my colleagues that work on string theory to go into a black hole. They argue that I have ulterior motives. I just say you could find out the answer by going there.
Yeah.
But they haven't done so far. There are lots of open questions that relate to this particular question. The second question that I would ask is, where is the nearest hub of intelligent civilizations where everyone meets and socializes? Because I would like to know where is the nearest civilization, how much we can learn from it, and then also learn from the history of past civilizations. There are lots of lessons probably that we can learn: how to cope with changing climate, with the risks of asteroids that kill the dinosaurs, with the star bursting and flaring, and a nearby star exploding. There are lots of risks, and it's interesting to find out. I mean, just like in Darwinian evolution, the fittest survives. So the question is, in the cosmological context, which are the fittest civilizations? Which are the longest lived civilizations? Are those the most aggressive ones that, conquered territories on other planets, or perhaps the peace-loving civilizations on a time scale of billions of years? Which ones survived for the longest? So I would like to know the answers to these questions. I'm not sure they would tell me. And by the way, what Eric Davis discussed, I'm still unclear as to whether that may be just humans, because it's very reasonable to imagine that the US government has an organization that seeks materials from crash sites of equipment from adversarial nations. Because during wars, you retrieve some materials like that. And so they might want to fool the adversarial nations as if we don't have anything, by saying, oh, there is some extraterrestrial equipment that we recovered, and give it a tint of uncredible claims. And then also, if there are pilots there, they might obviously look different if they originate from Russia versus China versus other countries. So these 4 types might just represent different people that happen to be the pilots of these vehicles.
Mutants, no?
No. Their body was distorted probably during the crash. So,
Okay.
so I'm saying these are just humans. But then Eric Davis hears these stories indirectly in these rumors and thinks that it represents aliens, but while it's not. So, of course, he might also be speaking the truth, in which case I would love to see those things.
Your question to the aliens are very unselfish. Wouldn't you like to know if there is life after death, for example?
Oh, no, I think we eventually will have the option of living forever, because we know of animals that repair their either DNA, like tardigrades, or actually grow new organs like the planaria, when you chop its head, there is a new head that comes out. And as far as we know, this animal could live forever. It started about 400 million years on Earth. And there was even an experiment chopping it into 279 pieces.
Oh my God.
And each of the pieces developed all the organs as if it was new. And just imagine Marie Antoinette put on the guillotine, and then during the French Revolution, and they chopped her head with a guillotine, and then if she was a planarian, she would have developed a new head, and the head would have developed a new body. So you would get two Marie Antoinettes for one.
Oh, okay.
So in fact, it would have actually made it even worse for the rebels at that time.
So you're not afraid of dying, I can hear.
I would love to live forever because there is so much that we don't know. I would love to learn.
You're curious.
Yeah, so it's a never-ending endeavor, and as far as I'm concerned, I would love to continue it forever.
Mm-hmm. You inspire thousands, or I'd argue millions of people around the world, but who inspires you?
Well, I started in my childhood with existentialist philosophers. So Jean-Paul Sartre was a role model for me. He declined the Nobel Prize, by the way, for literature, and because he said, "Oh, these members of the selection committee, they get a sense of self-importance by giving me the award. Why should I go there?" The feature of existentialism was that you don't pretend to be something else than the circumstances that you live in, and that sounded to me like a sincere admission at our existential state, which is not great. We are not the pinnacle of creation. We have to admit that. We make a lot of mistakes. We spend most of our time doing nonsense. You just read the news every day. You see that. And there could be someone better than us out in the stars. We are not even considering that when we allocate budgets for the search of life in the universe, which sounds ridiculous. So to me, there is a direct connection between my childhood and existentialism and what I'm doing right now in the context of astronomy. I also obviously admire Albert Einstein. And in that case, it's not only for the successful ideas that he had early on as a young scientist, but also for the wrong ideas that he had at the end of his career when he was at Princeton between 1935 and 1940. He made 3 mistakes. He argued that gravitational waves do not exist, that black holes do not exist, and that quantum mechanics doesn't have spooky action at a distance. And since then, there were 3 experimental teams that proven that black holes exist, that gravitational waves exist, that there is quantum entanglement, and they all got a Nobel Prize in physics over the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
So him being wrong actually stimulated research that led to exciting discoveries. And my point is that, if science is a learning experience, you never know in advance the answer. And even by being wrong, you can actually promote new knowledge. The worst thing you can do is argue that we already know the answer, we don't need to seek evidence, or that you can ridicule a question just because it sounds to you as extraordinary. Mm-hmm. I just had dinner a few days ago with a young physicist, and he very strongly advocated the notion that there is practically zero chance that an extraterrestrial technological object would be close to Earth. Mm-hmm. And so why should we look up? And my point is because you might be wrong.
Yeah. All these people that went against Einstein's theories and proved the world that he was wrong, pushed the frontier. For closing, which advice can you give to young scientists or just people in general that would like to push the frontier but are too timid to do that?
Well, first of all, maintain your childhood curiosity and don't pretend to be the adult in the room. As a young kid, I saw the adults around the dinner table having, very strong opinions about various questions. And it sounded like a cheat to me. I mean, they didn't really know the answer. They were inventing stories. So I decided to become a scientist. But in order to gain tenure, in order to get funded, in order to get recognition, you first have to build your status from scratch. And for that, you need to play to the tunes of selection committees. And, Pablo Picasso, the painter, early in his career, he painted realistically. And he was asked, why did you do that? And he said, I want to demonstrate that I can master the craft as it was practiced before me.
Yeah.
And after that, he started to invent other ways of painting, like cubism, much more abstract. So my advice is, yes, if you are an original thinker, at first demonstrate that you can master the craft of the way it was done before you, get tenure, and then allow yourself to be free in your thinking. And that is practically what happened to me.
Dr. Avi Loeb, thank you for inviting me to your beautiful home. I personally admire you, not just, again, your actions, but your wisdom, your humility. And I think that you'll go down in the history as one of the greatest because of your approach. And please continue with your work. You're inspiring millions of people. And it's an honor for me to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.